Okay, in the last lesson we talked about ifs and if-elses and how you could stack them up and do a whole bunch of tests with them. In this one, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can nest ifs and how decisions can be made. Sometimes the decisions are linear and they relate to one object. For example, if you were testing grades like last time, you could test each grade in a linear process and get to the right answer as to what score equated to what grade or vice versa. However, there are times when you don't have that kind of testing going on. For example, if you have someone who's working, and at least in the US, if you're working full time, if you're a full time worker, you get a vacation. Woo. If you're working part time, no vacation for you, or at least no pay anyway. You can take any days you off you want to an extent, but you don't get a vacation time. However, oftentimes inside our vacation world, you have to actually be employed for a certain amount of time. So in this example, let's just say, more than 2 years. Then yes, vacation. Less than 2 years. No vacation. So you can see that the part-time or full-time is pretty much self-delineating. You could test for one and know if this is not true, then it's this, or vice versa. But these outer tests, in this case, the full-time vacation, are separate from the inner test. The inner tests are linked to this full-time, but they really can't be tested 1, 2, or 3. If you tested for this first, you would get the wrong answer on a lot of this stuff. So let's convert this to code and see what we get. So to determine whether you're full-time or not, this is going to be a simple little Boolean. So we'll set it equal to true. So if you're full-time, and notice how simple this is. We don't have to do any equivalency testing or anything else. We can just use the Boolean value straight up as the test. If you're full-time, now we need to determine whether you get vacation or not. If you're not full-time, you don't get any vacation. So we will print that. Okay, but now we have to deal with the rest of this stuff. We're just going to move some things around. So this part right here is the inside portion of it. And the full-time piece, see the full-time test, if it's full-time, then this is the way it's going to work. Otherwise, this is the way it's going to work. And right now it's yelling at me because full-time is true because it's set as a literal and there's no input to this. So have you been working for more than 2 years? Well, we don't have anything to test for, so let's do this. 2 years worked. Currently set to 0, and we'll have to fix that. But if years worked is greater than or equal to 2, and then since it's a two-way selection, and there we go. So there's the else portion of it. So you can see here that we actually have a nested or a structured if-else that takes the first outside test and applies it to determine whether or not you need more information. So do we have more than 2 years? Yes. Now let's clean this up a little bit to follow standard coding practices. Our code is correct. And we'll have to ask a few questions here. Now, actually, this would be kind of fun. So to fill out these two pieces here, to see whether you are full-time or whether you have how many years you've worked, we need to ask a few questions. So this is our variable section. Now we're going to prompt and ask for, are you a full-time employee? Now, this is an interesting question. We can't really capture a Boolean value. People wouldn't understand that, but they would understand yes, no. So you can look at this as being characters that we're going to drive to stuff. So when we get this, instead of having, we don't have anything yet to put it into, but we will add that in. There we go. So if we're going to capture it as a character, we have to capture it here. So instead of this, well, actually, it's not instead of, but we'll add in a character. So now we will capture this yes or no. Hopefully the user will understand what that means, but now we've got to do a little bit of testing. So we will do an if and test for a single character, because we're only capturing one character, yes or no. If you wanted to capture it as a string, you could, but for now we're just showing you testing with a character. So if it's a yes, then full-time equals true. Else there you go. Now, as an interesting side note, we now know that based upon the way we structured this problem, if you're full-time is the only time we need to look at getting more years worked. We don't need it if you're not full-time. So this actually leads to an interesting point. Right here where we do this, we've determined your full-timeness. We can come right in here and say, okay, how many years have you worked? So this sets up the testing to determine vacation time. See, right here, are you full-time? If you're full-time, this sets up the rest of it. This gets the years that are worked. And if you're not, full-time becomes false, and then this thing will test itself correctly and let you know that you don't have vacation. So we can eliminate some of these comments just to make it cleaner. You can kind of start to see, I hope, that what we've got going on here is a fairly simple problem that needs input and then additional input based upon some of the conditions that you get. Now there's a bug here that we'll talk about in a second, but right now this should run, I hope, barring any problems. So are you a full-time employee? Yes, I'm a full-time employee. Number of years that I've worked? 2. I get paid vacation. Now, when it comes to running code like this, every branch of a decision is a separate test case. So right here, we can see we need to give a yes and a no. And that'll test both passes on this. And then that same yes will test this, but also we need 2 different sets of numbers to test this. So you need at least 4 separate tests to get this thing to actually determine whether it's running correctly. So you could say, yes, I'm a full-time employee, but I've only worked 1 year. I get no paid vacation. I can come in and say, no, I'm not a full-time employee, and I get no vacation. No vacation with pay. So that kind of gives me the parts that get me right. So actually, I didn't test no yet. Escape. There we go. Run it again and say I am not a full-time employee. No vacation with pay. But here's the bug. What happens if they follow my prompt and they do yes? Because this is a capital letter and I'm testing a lowercase letter, this won't actually work very well. Now, there is a nice little thing in our libraries that allow us to play with character strings. We can actually make these things become uppercase and lowercase. I'm going to leave that to you to go play with. I'll show it to you in a later example. But there's a to lower and a to upper that you can apply to make sure that you're testing against things that are correct. You could even go so far as to make this another constant and make a constant up here. If you want to make this thing nice and pretty. And there's your yes. So this is just an example of running nested if-elses together, how different things are related but not directly related like grades are, but this is not. You need one or the other. And how you can use some basic input from the user to determine what you need to do next, branching as needed to gather more information. So welcome to a slightly more complicated example of if-elses. Hope you've enjoyed it and have a great day.